Hi, my name is András Orisek. I'm happy to be a participant again at the Polyglot gathering this year as a presenter. The title of my presentation is Regaining Motivation in Language Learning. Some words about me. I come from Hungary. I work in supply chain area, and my hobbies are traveling and of course languages. I've been in contact with 20 languages. I speak the main Western European languages on sea level. I speak Central European languages on B level. I speak some Eastern European languages and some Asian languages on elementary level. What is my presentation about? I will mainly speak about motivation. I will speak about reasons for fading motivation in my case, and I will tell you how I recovered motivation for language learning. I will show you two ideas in detail. And the motto of the presentation is breaking habits, having new habits of language learning. Last year and this year are completely new context. We have less traveling, less personal contacts, and that means less motivation for language learning, at least for me. My story and timeline. I stopped to learn languages last year in May because I just didn't feel motivated. I restarted in summer with some traditional methods like reading, learning vocabulary, but I failed. I didn't feel enough motivated for that. And later, in autumn, I didn't restart. I even banned myself from learning languages. And I used this period to have new ideas, new inspiration. And finally, in November last year, I restarted. I will show you how I restarted. But first, a little bit more in detail about this language ban period. I told you that in autumn I didn't learn languages, I even banned myself from learning. And during this time, I decided not to have any stress for stopping to learn languages. And as I said, I banned myself from restarting. I even imagined to never restart again. And with all these feelings, I started to miss languages. However, I didn't restart, but I rather focused on new activities like home repair, sports, and so on. Now about the effects after this ban period. As I mentioned, I started to miss languages, and on the other hand, I had some bad feeling for lost time. We all have a lot of empty time slots, shorter or longer, every day and all day. And earlier I used to make use of these empty time slots by learning languages, listening to something, and I lost this type of activity. Another feeling, I didn't have a desire to go back to earlier methods like reading, learning vocabulary. And last but not least, this period of abstinence when I banned myself from learning languages inspired creativity. I really started to have some new ideas how I could restart differently than I used to learn. This is what I will present now in more detail. So the first idea is about video podcasts. It's something trivial, simple. I used to listen to podcasts earlier. However, now I am doing it differently. I found some interesting podcasts on YouTube in Deutsche Welle. However, it was not in German, it was in Ukrainian because I somehow felt like learning some Ukrainian. And these podcasts are rather short, not longer than 4 minutes. In fact, I filtered those podcasts which are shorter than 4 minutes. And all these podcasts have captions, subtitles, so I could easily check everything. So when I found these podcasts, the next step I did is to download them on my mobile, and then I split these MP3 files into short sections of 20-30 seconds. These seem to be very short. However, it's really important to have these shorter sections for better understanding and analyzing. Here's the screenshot of the app where I split the MP3 files. And finally, what I did and what I am doing with this podcast is that I replay these short sections 20-30 times until I understand everything. And the final goal is to be able to retell the story by shadowing. Either when I listen, I try to retell parallelly, or I read the text in the meantime. I listen, I read the captions, and I try to retell. Well, this last one is easier. When the text is a little bit more difficult, that's what I am doing. So these are two new actions I introduced in the earlier technique. Once again, have shorter chunks and replaying them as much as possible until I understand everything. Okay. Here's a screenshot of Samsung Music with replaying. As you can see here, the text, the podcast is 48 seconds long. In general, I make them even shorter. Now, speaking about fun, pleasure, because I'm having some fun, much pleasure with this podcast, mainly because these are different topics. I can select from hundreds of different topics, and the content is relevant for me, interesting. Some examples here: construction of Nord Stream gas pipeline, natural reserve area near the Black Sea, a gold mine in the Ukrainian Carpats, and so on, so on. I also have fun with these podcasts because they are short enough. Earlier I had long podcasts. I was a little bit losing the content. Now they are short enough not to be bored and short enough to understand easily everything. And due to the fact that it's easy and it's accessible, it becomes an unnoticed process. I have the feeling as if I wasn't studying. So these are all the features, all the factors for fun and pleasure. And now let's speak about comfort, because listening to this podcast is a comfortable process in the way I am doing it. Why is it comfortable? Because I have immediate access on the phone. This is first. Let's listen to this short.
Салат все одно вирощують, тож нам не потрібні додаткові площі. По суті, ми маємо справу. Овець несе кілька рослин до своєї лабораторії. Для Вюста та його колег коріння цикорію – важливий компонент для виробництва біопластику.
So this is an example of one of the podcasts. This is rather short, I think 19 seconds long. And they are replayed. So comfortable process because I have immediate access on the phone, and this podcast, these sections are short and they are replayed. So they are comprehensible. So that's why it's a comfortable process. And last but not least, it's easy to check everything. There are no hurdles because I have captions and the sections are short. And even this I can stop wherever I want. So all these things make the process comfortable. Okay, now let's go a step further. How can we make all these processes even easier than easy? Let's see some ideas. Well, the first idea and the recommendation I have is that if we listen to a podcast during the day, we have to be a little bit prepared in the evening before. We have to select, download, and split the MP3 files each evening for next day. Because in this way, when you get up, you just have to click on your phone and the podcast is going on. And you don't have to be worried about this, bother to downloading, etc. So you have to prepare a little bit. And another idea is really this text should be as accessible on your phone as possible. You could see in the previous video that the Samsung Music app was really in the first part of my screen. And here you can see that the podcast is in the first row. So they should be really accessible. Another idea is to select podcasts shorter than the average, 2 minutes versus 4 minutes. And similar idea to split to sections which are shorter, 20 seconds instead of 40 seconds. They seem to be quite short because, well, the problem is that they are interrupted after 20 seconds and it's going to the beginning. However, when you do it as a background activity, the main idea is really to be able to understand, even if you do something else in the meantime, like you do washing up or something different. So this is all this listening to this podcast is for background activity. It's important to underline. So these are some ideas, recommendation. How can we make the podcast, the listening to podcast, even easier? And that's about listening to podcasts. Now, let's speak about the next idea I have had recently, which is called reading at random. What does it mean? Well, this is randomly selecting and reading short passages of any language books. And the keywords here are short and any language book, because I can select any language book from any languages I have learned. I will show exactly how it works, but now a little bit about why is it a good practice and when is it a good practice. Well, it can happen that we are not really enthusiastic for learning. It's my case now, and I'm not interested in any particular language. In this case, it's a good idea to just select randomly from any languages I've learned before. We can also have a lack of desire to do exhausting repetition. That's a good method as well. And mainly, and that's a common problem, we can have not enough time for intensive studying. And in this case, this technique is also convenient, but let's see how it works. Well, first of all, what I do is that I mix up the language books on my shelf. As I learned quite a lot of languages in my life, all these books are on a bookshelf and they are ranged language by language. So the first step I do is to mix them up. Let's see why. Yeah, here's an example where I can see Portuguese books, one next to the other, and the second screenshot shows different language books. So that's what I need. Then, let's continue the process. I close my eyes and I open a book and I open it on a random page and I put my finger anywhere on the book. I still have my eyes closed, I don't look at it. And then I open my eyes and I mark the area selected. I select the 5 centimeter high section, not more, because I just have 5 minutes for that. Yeah, that's the limit I've determined for myself. So I select an area in the book randomly, which I can read for 5 minutes. And well, in general, it should be not more than a section of 5 centimeter height. Okay, now I mark it with a pencil when read, and that's it. So let's look at how it works. I take a random book from the shelf and I open it on a random page. And I select this 5 centimeter part. It's page 57 and it's Polish grammar, so I mark it here. And I start to read this section for 5 minutes. That's it. Okay, I think that's clear. Now, let's speak about some examples. Let's show some examples. Here I can see a Chinese section, then Turkish with Russian translation, Serbian. These are all sections I've selected randomly recently. Portuguese, French. The last example is quite interesting. This is one of my first books. Of course, in French I'm on a higher level now, but it's always interesting to go back to the basics. And without this technique, I would have never gone back to that book. I would have never opened that book, and it was some kind of nostalgia. Okay, which are the benefits of this technique? First of all, I have no energy lost for planning because the process is random. It doesn't require preparation. On the other hand, I have no feeling of obligation because in this technique, we don't have to execute something important. We don't have to learn 100 words. We don't have to read through a long text, etc. It's a short process, so you can do it for your leisure. Third remark I made here, no boredom. You don't get bored because this process is for short time and the content is also varied. These are different topics, different exercises selected randomly. The 5-minute slots mean that these slots could be available for you several times a day. You can have several times 5-minute slots. If it was 10 or 15 minutes, it would be difficult and it would require some more planning. But okay, for 5 minutes you can stop your main activity and you can have some fun reading randomly something. So there's easy availability. Yeah, banning after 5 minutes inspires to go on. What does it mean? Well, the feeling I've had is that after 5 minutes I would continue, I would go on. Yeah, it becomes interesting. However, there's this 5-minute limit and I think it's compulsory. You have to stop. And it inspires you to go back to the same book, and it inspires you to select randomly again. You hope to select the same book, the same section randomly, and once again this interruption somehow inspires you to keep on learning. Yeah, as I mentioned, we have some nostalgia, and this is a nostalgical process because you can open your dusty old language books and it's quite interesting. And finally, we have full access to these language books, especially during lockdown when you are at home. So these are the benefits. And now let's go a little bit further, and this will be my last section here with this idea. How can we make this process even more efficient? Well, as I showed you in the video, I mark the title and the number of page on a paper. So what I can do is that I take this paper some weeks later and I select one of these sections randomly again, and I go back to the same sections I read some weeks earlier, and I will read it out loud, or I will summarize the text. I will do more practice. Anyway, I do some more accurate, more in-depth exercise with the same section I have read through some weeks earlier. So this is what I recommend in order to make this process more active and more efficient. Once again, reminder, this process shouldn't last more than 5 minutes either, because we just have no time. It's not realistic to dedicate more time for that. And if you just keep the time minute limit, you will have several times a day this kind of availability. And you are not stressed about this, because if it was 15 minutes or half an hour, you should plan and you should have the obligation to execute, etc. So it means more stress. In this technique, there's no stress, just leisure and fun. So that was about reading at random. And now we are getting closer to the end of my presentation. I would like to summarize and show some key takeaways about all what I've said so far. The first, I want to enhance again the creativity process. In fact, when I stop to learn languages, it inspires me to have more ideas, some new ideas, how to learn, how not to learn as before, etc., etc. So I think if you stop to learn because you don't feel enough motivated, it's not a problem. You shouldn't be stressed about this. Just you have to take your time, have some new inspiration, and then come back to language learning. Breaking habits. It's interesting to have some completely new ideas, and I think you could see with these two examples that although these are traditional activities like reading and listening to podcasts, however, I added something complementary and I added something new to these processes. I broke habits. Filling in short time slots. Both these activities are convenient when you have not enough time, and you can fill in these short time slots you have. Everybody has short time slots. When you, I don't know, go to the bathroom to wash your teeth, when you do some washing up, some housework, so on, so on. And these activities like random reading are convenient to do them between two main activities as a pause. Speaking about listening to podcasts, this can be as a background activity. So, you don't have to interrupt your main activity, you do, but you can fill in the gaps. Another common thing in these two techniques is that you can have varied and relevant content. Randomly reading at random means really varied content. You can select whatever you want, but similar case for podcasts, because I can select from hundreds of different podcasts. It's important to have easy access to all this, and I showed you with podcasts that I did everything to have the easiest possible access to these podcasts. Randomness also is important. Random reading, the random feeling, the lack of planning. We have to plan everything in our life. We have strict timeline, etc. Let's do our favorite activity, which is language learning. Let's do it without any planning, just for your fun, randomly. And finally, with all these features, these processes become unnoticed, and you have unnoticed exposure to the language. And finally, and this is the most important, you enjoy the process. At least I enjoy the process of learning with these two techniques, and other similar techniques I can speak about later, maybe in later presentations. And I hope that you have enjoyed my presentation as well, and I'm looking forward to have some comments later. So thank you for your attention. Bye.